Dust clung to the air of the frontier town like a second skin, settling on boots, hats, and the wooden stalls of the market. It was late afternoon, the kind when the sun poured molten light over the dirt street, making the world burn gold. But today, it wasn't the weather that held the townsfolk, it was the spectacle. A chained woman stood near the auction stand, taller than any man present, towering over the crowd like a tree among shrubs. She was an Apache, and her sheer size alone drew whispers sharper than any blade. Men leaned on posts, muttering to each other in half-disbelief. "Never seen one like her," a rancher spat, shaking his head. "Too big to be a woman." Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, both frightened and fascinated. Traders and drifters laughed cruelly, calling her names: beast, ox, half-human. Every insult hung in the air, feeding the growing mockery. But the woman did not bow her head. Her long black hair fell across her shoulders, her proud chin tilted high. Though her wrists bore iron cuffs, her dignity remained unbroken. Her people had been forced to flee these lands years ago, scattered under the weight of soldiers and settlers. Now she stood alone, a symbol of what had been taken. Yet the traders saw no history in her, no story, only a price. They called her too big to marry, too monstrous to mother a child, unfit for any future but one. "Mark her for slaughter," barked the man who had captured her, eyes cold with greed. "Sell her for meat, she'll feed more than one winter." Laughter rolled cruelly through the crowd. The giantess didn't flinch, though inside, her blood boiled hotter than the desert sun. They reduced her to cattle, a life measured not in honor or spirit, but in weight and flesh. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from fury. She would not give them tears. She would not let them see her break. Her dark eyes scanned the faces, so many sneering mouths, so many hands eager for her end. Yet beneath the humiliation there burned something untamed, a fire none could chain. She was Apache, and she remembered. Closer to the stage, a boy tugged his father's sleeve, whispering, "Pa, is she a monster?" The man's reply was cruel and quick. "Monsters don't cry, son, but they can bleed, and this one'll bleed plenty." The crowd roared with approval, delighting in the show, but for every laugh, there was also unease. Some men kept their distance, unwilling to step too near, as though afraid her strength might shatter the irons and turn their jeers into screams. That fear was her last weapon, though she had no strength left to use it. She shifted against the chains, the iron biting her wrists raw. Pain flared, but she made no sound. Even in this cage of mockery, she carried herself taller than them all. Still, the cruelty continued. Coins clinked as wages passed between hands, how long she'd last, how much meat her body could bring, whether she'd fight when the killing began. They had stripped her of name and spirit, and in their eyes, she was already gone. Yet the sun, dipping lower in the sky, seemed to catch her defiance, setting it ablaze in gold. Then came the voice of the trader, sharp and commanding. "Step forward. Who will take her?" Silence fell heavy, broken only by the creak of wagon. Wheels in the distance. No man wanted her for wife, nor worker, nor servant. She was too much, too tall, too strong, too feared. "For meat, then," the trader growled, lowering the price to tempt the crowd. A ripple of interest stirred. Men began to count coin, already picturing her on the butcher's block, stripped of humanity entirely. The air thickened with greed, and the stench of something darker than death. And then, against the tide of jeers, boots struck the dust. Steady, unhurried steps cut through the noise, belonging to a man not from the crowd, but apart from it. He wore a trail-worn hat. His shirt faded from sun and sweat, a revolver resting at his hip. His face was young, no more than late 20s, but his eyes carried weight far older, eyes that had seen both loss and war. He stopped before the stage, standing not in awe, not in mockery, but in silence. The crowd's laughter faltered. Curiosity, turning toward him, the trader smirked, sensing coin. "You, cowboy, fancy a beast for yourself?" The question rang loud, meant to shame him, to turn the crowd's laughter against the stranger. But the cowboy didn't flinch. He looked up. At the Apache woman really looked, seeing not just the chains or her height, but the fire that refused to die in her gaze. And in that stillness, something shifted. Where others saw a monster, he saw dignity. Where they saw cattle, he saw a warrior undone by cruelty. His jaw tightened, his hand drifted to the pocket that held his last coin. The crowd waited, breathless, for his reply. For the cowboy, there was no choice left. He spoke, voice low but cutting through the mockery like steel. "She's no beast, she's mine." Gasps rippled, followed by mocking laughter, men slapping their thighs in disbelief. "Yours?" one shouted. "What, you'll marry her, boy, or let her crush you in your sleep?" More laughter thundered, but the cowboy didn't move, didn't smile. His eyes never left hers. In that gaze, silent and steady, the giantess felt, for the first time in days, not a weapon, not prey, but seen. The trader frowned, sensing resistance where there should have been none. "It'll cost you," he warned, rattling his bag of coin. But the cowboy only nodded, tossing down silver enough to hush even greedy lips. The sound of metal striking wood rang across the square, final and sharp. The crowd fell silent, the laughter dimming into murmurs of disbelief. The cowboy had spoken, and in that moment the fate of the Apache giantess changed. Her wrists still bore iron, her body still marked for slaughter, but for the first time since capture, the horizon shifted. Hope flickered. The townsfolk watched, in disbelief, as the cowboy led the chained Apache giantess away from the stage. Dust swirled beneath their boots, whispers chasing him with every step. "Fool," someone muttered. "She'll kill him in his sleep." Another spat. "A man throws coin on meat, calls it a wife." Their laughter echoed, but the cowboy didn't turn back. His hand rested steady on the chain, not pulling her, not dragging, simply guiding. She followed, silent but watchful, her proud shoulders squared. With each step, she carried the heavy weight of humiliation, yet also the strange spark of something she couldn't name. They reached his horse, a lean bay gelding tied near the edge of town. The giantess towered above the animal, and the horse stamped nervously, sensing her size. The cowboy spoke low, calm words to soothe it before cutting the chain that bound her wrists. The crowd gasped, expecting her to attack, but she didn't. Instead, she rubbed her raw wrists, eyes never leaving him. For the first time since her capture, no iron weighed her down. Freedom, even partial, was a shock. Still, she didn't flee. She lingered, caught between suspicion and a strange pull toward this quiet stranger. The cowboy mounted and motioned for her to follow. His cabin lay beyond the plains, a half-day's ride west. She hesitated, glancing back at the town where jeers still rang. To return meant death, to remain meant humiliation. To follow him. She couldn't yet understand what that meant. But something in his eyes had been different. Not pity, not ownership, but recognition. Slowly, she walked beside his horse. The setting sun burned crimson on the horizon, throwing long shadows behind them. Each step away from the marketplace felt like a small rebellion, a refusal to let them decide her fate. Night fell over the plains, the sky lit by 1,000 stars. They stopped by a creek to rest. He built a fire, moving with the practiced ease of a man who had lived too long in solitude. She sat across from him, her tall frame tense, her hands resting on her knees like a warrior in council. Neither spoke for a long while. The fire crackled between them, the silence heavy but not hostile. Finally, he tore bread in half and offered it. She stared, hesitant, then accepted. It wasn't kindness she expected, but something deeper, respect unspoken. The cowboy studied her in the firelight, Scars traced her arms, signs of battles fought and survived. Her eyes held storms, the kind that carried both sorrow and defiance. He thought of the war he had fought, of friends buried and a home long lost. In her, he saw a reflection of his own brokenness. She was not what the world wanted her to be, just as he no longer fit in the world he had returned to. Perhaps that was why he had stepped forward in the square, because two outcasts, abandoned by fate, recognized one another. As dawn painted the sky, they continued west. The plains stretched endless, a sea of grass whispering in the wind. She walked with a steady stride, her height casting long shadows in the morning light. He rode quietly, glancing at her from time to time. The distance between them wasn't just space. It was history, culture, blood spilled on both sides. Yet with each mile, that distance seemed to shrink. She began to sense he wasn't leading her to a prison, but to something else. The thought unsettled her. Trust was a luxury, and she had lost too much to risk it. By midday, they reached his cabin, a lone structure of timber and stone at the edge of the wild. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney, and a corral stretched nearby with a few cattle grazing. He dismounted, tying his horse. She stood still, scanning the land with cautious eyes, measuring the silence. He opened the cabin door and stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter first. It was a small thing, but she noticed. He treated her not as an animal, not as property, but as a guest. For her, this respect struck deeper than chains or laughter ever had. Inside, the cabin was modest. Rifle above the hearth, worn table, a bed neatly made. He set down his hat and motioned toward the seat. She sat slowly, her frame nearly dwarfing the chair. He poured water, sliding the cup across the table. Again, silence stretched, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was tentative, like two souls circling the edge of understanding. She wanted to ask why. Why claim her? Why risk mockery, danger, and ruin? But her tongue held back. Words were fragile. Instead, she watched his hands as he worked, scarred and steady, the hands of a man who had carried burdens. That night, as the wind howled outside, the cowboy sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. She lay on the bed, though sleep eluded her. She thought of the town, of the trader's greed, of the laughter that had burned her dignity. Yet her mind returned again and again to the moment he had said, "She's mine." At first the words had cut, for no one should claim another. But in his voice, she had heard something different. Not possession, protection, a vow unspoken that he would stand between her and the cruelty of the world. That truth unsettled her heart. Days turned into weeks. She healed slowly from her wounds, both seen and unseen. He asked for nothing, demanded nothing. They worked the land side by side. She strong enough to lift timbers he alone could not. He skilled enough to teach her the tools of this strange new life. Trust came not in words, but in silence, when he set down his rifle within her reach, when she shared bread without hesitation. They were still outcasts, still marked by scars and whispers, but together they forged something unexpected. Not chains, not ownership, but a bond carved from honor itself.